It is about 6:02. This is February 26, 2024. We're here for the study session of the Independent City Council. First item on the agenda is a resolution establishing the Opioid Settlement Advisory Committee, stating the broad policy guidelines for the use of said funds and outlining the process by which funds will be dispersed. This is a council member sponsored item by Council Member at Large Bridget McCandless. You ready to discuss, Council Member?
Of course.
All right, take it away.
As many folks know, there have been lawsuits across the country dealing with some of the practices by corporations around opioids. And for that reason, many communities went into litigation against those companies. Independents will be receiving a portion of those settlement funds. They're currently in a segregated fund, and as this resolution talks about, it is to maintain those in a segregated fund, to establish a committee made up of people who have backgrounds in opioid use disorder treatment, in people who have mental health backgrounds, as well as associated services. And from that, to look at intervention, prevention, and treatment, and set up a process to be able to take applications for those funds. The good news is that those funds come over a period of time. The bad news is we don't know exactly how much money because there are still many outstanding settlements. I am hoping that that amount of money will grow over time. It is a complex issue. And I want to be sure that we are as thoughtful as we can be in the application for and use of those funds. So that is the overall statement, and the mechanics are discussed in the resolution.
Any other discussion?
Just a question maybe for the city manager.
Go ahead.
Do we have any idea how much money we're talking about at this point, ballparkish?
I think we've received north of $400,000 that is currently set aside. The duration will be around 10 years. There may be a tail end on that, but that's yet to be determined.
Okay. All right. And we don't know how much, we don't have any idea how much it'll be in the long run, so.
Not yet.
Gotcha. Okay. And like you say, the requirement is that be used for opioid treatment issues, that sort of, correct?
So the settlement comes with Schedule E, which is a list of acceptable uses for this, and there is a reporting schema for us to be able to report to the state, who has to then be able to report up from there. So there are approved uses. There are some that have a little bit more give in them, but you still have to make a rationale to whether this is an issue that was caused by or related to drug use. So it doesn't have to specifically be only opioids, which some past issues have been that people have co-occurring disorders. So there is some latitude in that space.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councilmember McCandless. Section 4 says that the the terms will expire no later than March 1st, 2025. Does that mean you'll just then reappoint people? There'll be a new group that's appointed after that?
I would imagine that there would be some people who would be reappointed. It doesn't say that they couldn't be, but that's just the initial term of service.
I would suggest we probably should have either another section or have language in this resolution that covers that folks should be appointed or reappointed at some natural term until the opioid settlement money is spent. Reoccurring every year, 18 months, or 2-year term, or whatever it would be. So if we're talking about a 10-year term.
Could it be
of
that they
funds.
would lay out the uses, this committee would lay out the uses and criteria for that, and then it just be followed through on over the time period, not have to maintain the committee? I'm just thinking out loud.
I would imagine that you would set forth your original parameters around what you're trying to accomplish with the dollars, but then obviously you're not going to give somebody a 10-year grant.
Right.
So there would have to be reapplications. So you may seat a group every 2 years to redo organizational applications. You know, some of them may just be a simple renewal, but some may be brand new. So I think you're going to have an ongoing need, but the first group may be very different than the people who do subsequent work.
Do we have a time, I was looking here, do we have a timeline for where they would have their initial recommendations?
We didn't put that in the ordinance, no.
I guess my thought being that if we put this together relatively quickly, would it be possible for this group to have some input relative to our upcoming fiscal year? I mean, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud, and that way we have, you know, the ability to maybe use some of those funds this fiscal year as opposed to having, I mean, we can always do a special, you know, appropriation, I know,
Sure.
but I'm just thinking out loud.
Well, I think, doesn't this, Mr. City Manager, doesn't this operate outside the budget, though? This is more like a special fund. It's not a tax, but it's more like a special fund, and the funds could be allocated at any time, right?
The funds could be the recommendations made by the committee and then brought to the council at any point during the fiscal year. The only, I get, if the council were wanting these to be as, you know, some sort of operating dollars for a department or a program, but I think in my discussions with you, I envision these, because these are one-time funds consistent with your policy, you know, trying to make sure that they support one-time activities, one-time purchases, et cetera.
You know, I suppose, for discussion purposes, the only parameter that we possibly should consider would be if we want them to fit into our adopted strategic plan. I guess that could be a consideration for the committee when it's formed.
I would imagine that any of the activities that they would recommend, I'm trying to think if there could be anything in there that wouldn't fit within the strategic plan. And maybe I'm not creative enough, but we can certainly add that in there, that it's consistent with the council's action plan, okay?
Yeah,
That sounds good. I like that idea.
yeah. Yeah, we just hadn't talked a lot about this style of, I don't remember exactly all the points in the strategic plan, but
Now, the strategic plan is relatively silent on some of the things that this is going to talk
Correct.
about. You know, we don't have much that talks about, you know, wraparound services for kids. We don't have stuff in there that talks about prevention activities. Those are not things that we included in our strategic plan. So, I think you want to give them the latitude to do the
Sure.
best work they can do.
absolutely.
And not be bound
Yeah,
too much by
We don't
that.
want to push them too much. I just was
Yeah.
trying to think about if it was possible to,
And-
but it's probably you know, I mean, like I say, this probably warrants a special appropriation at the time whenever it comes due, so that makes sense.
And to address your issue of timeline, so it would be available for the approved budget. In order for them to do their deliberations, to put forward a process, and for organizations to be able to submit applications and be judged and awarded,
Probably couldn't have.
that might be
Yeah.
tight.
That'd be push, yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Okay.
Could I get a little clarification on what you're wanting on the terms? I'm still a little unsure on that. So right now, the way it reads is they shall serve without compensation for a term expiring no later than March 1st, 2025, unless further council action extends the committee's duties or until a successor is duly qualified and appointed. So I guess that sort of contemplates that this is sort of a one, that this group is kind of at least an initial appointment, and we're going to decide later what to do with them. Is that what you're after, or are you wanting to set this up more as a, normally if on a committee we do, 3-year terms, that stagger or something like that. So you appoint the first group and one falls off after a year, the other one falls off 2 years and 3 years, and then you could obviously reappoint them. But that way you don't have everyone coming off at the same time, but that's only if this is a group that's going to be ongoing. So I'm just trying to figure out if you're wanting to tweak that or if you like it the way it is.
My suggestion would be that we set it up and contemplate that it will be an ongoing committee for 10 years, assuming that that's how long the settlement money is going to stretch, so that we should set it up like our other committees run,
Okay.
so that we build in language that contemplates people falling off and then reappointments occurring.
Understood. Okay. Thank you.
Unless, you're good with that.
Good with that, yeah.
Anything else, Councilmember Stewart?
Because your idea would be that that committee would be the one that would recommend the grants, right? I mean, So
Right.
they got to be in existence that long in order to
Right.
recommend those, so.
Right. Yeah. Agreed. Anything else from anybody on this topic? No. All right. So we'll bring that forward on the next regularly scheduled council meeting. Thank you very much, Councilmember McCandless. Next item on the agenda is citizen requests. It's my understanding nobody signed up to speak on this item. So next we have a presentation on the agenda item is discussion of the city charter proposed amendment. And is that Mr. Walker, Mr. Cover?
Thank you. It says presentation. It really isn't.
Yeah.
We really don't have a presentation, to be fair.
Fair enough.
The documents that you have been provided.
Yeah.
What we attempted to do was take the feedback that we heard last time and to put those into a working document. So you've got a dual red line. It's technically a red line and a blue line. The red line shows the proposed changes from the Charter Commission. The blue line shows the other changes that you all have been discussing, with the exception of the primary section, because the Charter Commission had recommended eliminating the primaries. It didn't make sense both practically and in terms of being able to read a document where both of those existed together. So what you see in that document is just what we're hearing from you all, what you're considering with the primaries. So depending on how you decide to go there, that language, if that's the direction you want to go, would be incorporated into the total document for consideration later. Our goal for tonight is to hopefully get enough guidance from you all that then we can come back at the March 11th study session with a draft ordinance for you to look at to say, okay, here's we've heard what you got, here's what we've got right now, get any feedback, additional feedback at that point, and then bring forward those ordinances, depending on what you all decide, in April for your consideration.
Perfect. Appreciate that, Mr. Cover. And for the folks that are in the audience or watching online or listening, if you happen to come across a copy of this, is this attached to the online agenda, do we know? Or is this available online, this version of the draft?
Yes, the city clerk added those to the online agenda items so the public can access those as well.
Okay, and just so we're clear, there's a copy of this version of the charter, the items that are in red with red lines or underlined or in red type, those are the changes to the original charter that were recommended or made by the Charter Commission. The blue lines and blue type were changes that were recommended or made by the city council during our special meeting, special session that we had a couple of weeks ago. So there's a couple different sections of changes throughout the entire charter that are on there, but that's where those changes and discussions came from, just so folks know where they are. So, discussion time.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
Is it worth just reminding people how we got to this spot?
Go ahead.
Okay. Just for context, for people who haven't paid any attention, but all of a sudden woke up and here's this gigantic charter document in front of them. As you will recall, more than a year ago, we appointed 11 members from the community to sit on the Charter Commission. They came from a variety of backgrounds. Each one of the council members was able to make suggested appointments. Obviously, we took all kinds of information from people who sent us emails as well. We had not really done a good review of this charter in more than 40 years, so it needed some serious dusting off. And I may, when I'm done with these remarks, ask Mr. Walker just to talk about what other communities have done up to this point. And they met for an entire year and spent more than a collective 600 hours of consideration. They voted on every single section after sometimes more than one deliberation. We have several of the folks who dedicated their time and energy to this here in the room, very much appreciative of their work. They used model language from other charters. They looked at charters from around the area. In some cases, they looked at information from the whole state, how people have done that, got information from the election board. So really spent a lot of time and diligence to provide this document. And then Councilmember Fears and myself went through it word by word, and it was very well done. So Jeremy, Lindsay, thank you. And then spent some time discussing with our colleagues kind of where we had questions or needed clarification or thinking about it from the council lens. Did we look at it differently than the Charter Commission did? And so that is how you ended up with the red line, blue line version. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. And Mr. Walker, would you just talk about other communities and how they've approached their charters?
Yes, I'd be happy to. And I think that response is best understood in a little bit of historical context. As we were preparing, the city attorney and I, for this process, we did the best we could to go back and look at some of the historical context of when our charter was first adopted in the late 1960s. And the group, the Charter Commission that worked on that document, was really doing so in response to what I would call a very heavily politicized environment. So they were looking to establish a more professionalized, efficient, managed environment here at the City of Independence. So in response to that, the document was very stringent. What departments will exist, what qualifications for different leadership positions in the city would look like, how different businesses were to be regulated and operated, et cetera, frequency of different kinds of inspections, all of those things. Over the years, there's an organization, the National Civic League, who has prepared a model city charter, and they are now on their 9th revision of that. They have recommended a city charter that promotes more lean operations so that future councils and future communities can adapt the general day-to-day operations of the community to fit with the needs of the time, while also still having very broad outlines on the form of government itself. So the work that our Charter Commission did really, I would say, brought that more in line with that current model city charter. So you'll notice that the document itself was cut largely in half, so from about 60 pages down to 30. Removes references to qualifications for certain positions, because we already have that in our table of organizations for our director and above level positions in the city. removes a lot of those, references to businesses and how they're to be regulated and inspected, because that's already in our city code, where those can be changed and modified as certain advancements or new policies require that. So I would say this document gives the council, gives the community the broad, firm outlines of the council manager form of government without the rigidity that our current charter has. It would require a more frequent review process in keeping with other municipalities so that we don't wait another 40 years before this is done again. But at the end of the day, this charter would largely reflect what our peer cities, both in Missouri and across the country, have done in keeping with that model city charter.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. So I looked over the red line, blue line version. Looks great. Lindsay or Jeremy or whoever did the great job on that. It really does look very good. I have one question on language, and then I have one, and then I have another question. But because I really think it really encompasses everything we asked for. On the part about selling public utilities, it says the council by ordinance may call for an election to determine whether the city shall sell any of its public utilities. It says we may call. I'm concerned that in the event we were to determine to sell, I don't want us to sell a public utility without a public vote, is my point. And so can we tighten that language up a little bit? I mean, that would just be my question about that. I think I'd feel better about that, at least, if we could.
And it was confusing to have may and
Yeah.
Same
It's kind of in the same
statement.
sentence, so. You want
The language-
you want
the
a page,
language-
Jeremy?
Yes, we can tighten that up.
The language is correct, but we're not, everybody's a lawyer.
Yeah, we can tweak that.
Yeah.
Okay.
The language, so everybody's clear, the language is intended to mean, and this was the intent of the council, very clearly, to say, no public utilities can or would be sold unless or until there is a public vote.
Right. That was our intent.
Yes.
And I just was concerned that it feels a
Yes,
little more
it does.
wishy-washy
Then we
than
meant,
that,
yes.
so.
Yeah.
That was one
Yeah.
comment.
Yeah.
The other thing, Mr. Cover, you were going to give some further thought as to how we might divide and conquer this thing from a ballot perspective. Have you had a chance to do that, and what was your conclusion?
So a couple of things, and I'm going to actually turn it over to Ms. Kolish, because she's kind of been doing a deep dive into that particular issue. So one thing we had a call this afternoon with the Jackson County Election Board. The thought that I had that I have used in other cities, but admittedly not in Jackson County, was to have an exhibit that, to go along with the ballot that essentially had all of the changes in it. That was what I had in my head. They're not on board with that. So they're not okay with there being anything extra beyond what is in the actual ballot language. So what I think, it doesn't change my overall recommended approach, but it does tweak it a little bit. And so what we're now thinking is that before the thought was the questions themselves would be fairly succinct and to the point, and you would be able to reference this exhibit that essentially you'd have there. So that's not going to be an option. So what we're leaning towards now is there will be more detail in the actual questions than to give voters a little bit better of an idea exactly which what those sections are, but then essentially the exhibit's going to have to be on the city website. And obviously, you know, we're going to have to publicize that. Nothing keeps anyone from having their phone, you know, out with them. They can go and look at it. So, I mean, there is still going to, you know, my thought is there is still an exhibit, but we don't have the option of handing it to them when they check in at the polls, which is what I had sort of hoped it would be. So it's going to have to be something they reference. And so because of that, I think, you know, we're going to have to put, you know, a little more detail into the actual questions to give people a better understanding. But again, then my thought is on the website, each one of those questions, it's going to have those sections. So if you know on question 1, these are all the sections that you know in the proposed language for question 1, and so that's how it would be broken down on the website. So that's kind of what I'm thinking. Lindsay has sort of done a deep dive into what the sections that sort of make sense, and it may not. It's certainly not numerical. It's more about sort of, you know, lumping together
subject matter.
similar subject matters and making it so that, you know, we don't want a situation where we make changes in one section, but and those affect another section, and that section doesn't get changed, right? So we're trying to kind of keep that in mind. So with that, Lindsay, you want to tell
Sure.
what you found, what you looked at?
So in no particular order, I thought that a first question could be Articles 1, which is the incorporation and the form of government, and then also the new public engagement provision. Article 2, which is the council. Article 4, municipal court. Article 5, board members, council members, and then there's also the Board of Ethics in there. And then also Article 11, which is planning and zoning. And I thought those were more outward-facing city operations, as opposed to a second question, which would be more internal city operations. Article 3, the city manager. Article 8, financial management. Article 9, license taxes. Article 10, public improvements, special assessments, and condemnation. And then everything else would be in one. And then again, it would be in the third one. And then again, with the thought that the sale of a public utility would be a single question. And then depending if we want to do Article 6 in one question, or if we want to do just the primary in one question, kind of depending on how we want to move forward with that section.
So to summarize that, the way if we were putting forward all of the proposed amendments at one time, that would be, the way you have broken it down, would be five separate questions, correct?
Correct.
So that's, again, and this is, you know, we walked through it earlier today. I mean, again, there's logic behind that. That's not to say that you all couldn't, you know, have a different preferred way to group these together. I mean,
Yeah.
we tried to kind of take a look at what we thought made sense based on the subject matter, and that's where we ended up.
Yeah,
So basically, I hear you saying inward facing would be one question, outward facing, would be another question, everything else would be another question, and anything that didn't really fit into inward or outward, I'm
Just
trying to.
miscellaneous kind of things. It would be initiative, referendum, and recall, which is not
Gotcha.
miscellaneous, but
Okay.
not exactly a city function.
Right.
Privately owned utilities, and then the general and miscellaneous provisions and the charter and the schedule in the very back.
Gotcha. And then would be a question on the primary and a question on the sale of public
utility
utilities.
Correct.
language.
And I thought for the primary question, we could either do Article 6 there are some revisions to Article 6 that don't have anything to do with the primary at all, so we could do those also in one question without the 50% primary, or we could take that one by itself.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
Go ahead, Councilmember.
Just for clarity on the primary question, so that the people listening know what we're talking about, the Charter Commission recommended that we do away with the primary, that only Kansas City and St. Louis have primaries and the rest of the municipalities only have a general election. So Lee Summit and Blue Springs, they managed to do this with multiple candidates, but winner takes all at the general election. And there is substantive cost to the city to have a primary election in February. because it's normally the only thing on that ballot, and it's hard to publicize that. And as we saw in the last election, we didn't have fantastic turnout. So that was their recommendation. We had an internal discussion around primaries, and I'll just give my rationale, which is that I was a much better candidate and council member for having gone through the primary process because I had a longer period to both learn about the issues, talk to people, and learn about the city. Of course, there was more cost to me to run 2 elections. The compromise that we talked about was the possibility of, should that primary occur and one of the candidates gets more than 50%, then they would not have to go on to the general. The pro and con of that is, of course, then you only have to have 1 election if that person takes more than 50%. The con is if only 100 people show up for the election and you take 50% of a very small number, you've been elected with a very small number. So this is my internal struggle, and I'm sure that other people have had to think that through as well. So I was very strongly in the keep the primary with a 50% camp. After watching the very, very low turnout for District 1, I'm like, that raises its own issues. So I am still contemplating that issue. Thank you.
Thanks, Councilmember. You know, the Charter Committee had multiple meetings just on this issue, and the data they came across was surprising. Also, that not having a primary increased voter turnout for the general, which I was not aware of. When you couple that with the low voter turnout for a single issue primary, which is what we see regularly here, the case becomes even stronger. And then when you couple that with the cost of the primary, it becomes a pretty good case to not have a primary. But, old dogs don't learn new tricks. And you can see the value in both sides. It really is something. It's a barrier to entry. It precludes candidates from running. It makes sure that people don't run unless they really want to run. In Blue Springs, regularly, I just, for whatever reason, every time Carson Ross runs for mayor for however many decades in a row now, there are like 5 candidates, and he wins by 30%, or with 30% of the vote. Then people say, well, so only 30% of the people support you, which is not really true, because you end up with a lot more than that support you. It's just they didn't necessarily vote for you the first time around. I don't know. It's. I'm sure we'd be fine either way. We're fine now. We'd be fine without it. If we're going to do away with it, it should be undoubtedly a vote, because people are definitely going to be split. It's going to be a firebrand issue. My personal take on it is probably because we have not updated the charter in so long and haven't even tried to update the charter in so long, we'd probably treat it as a third rail and probably just leave it alone. If we do decide to attempt to change it, it definitely should be its own question, for sure. And let people vote on it separately, because
That raises a question in my mind, is that if.
now, hang on a second.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Now, that's all right.
thought
Now,
you were done.
I would say this, since I won 50% in my primary, I'm all for that being done at 50%. So,
You didn't even have a primary.
The first time around I
Oh, the
did.
first time around. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
And I cleared 50%, so I would be all for that provision. So now, yes, sir, go ahead.
Well, the thought that I just had was that in the event that we were not going to propose a change, or that, that we were not going to propose doing away with the primary, would we still want to have that question on the ballot? Because if we modify it in the way that we've outlined here, I'm not sure we would need a separate question for the primary if we're not going to propose doing away with it.
No,
If we
no.
propose doing away with it, then I think we probably would.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not as drastic of a change
Yeah.
in this case, but I'm just thinking out loud here.
The other changes to that section are pretty nominal.
Correct.
So in my mind, if you're not proposing to either eliminate the primary, like the Charter Commission had recommended, or the 50% idea that has been floated around. If you decide that you don't want to mess with those right now, then I would say that Article 6 is just incorporated into one of the other questions, and it doesn't need to be standalone, because without that primary issue, there really isn't anything, I'll say, controversial in there. So, I mean, that's really, to me, that's the question to you all. That's the direction we're looking for in terms of preparing, an ordinance is which direction are you generally leaning? Charter Commission, 50%, or leave it as is?
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem.
Councilmember Stewart.
So my personal preference is that we leave it the way it is. However, I absolutely do not like the idea of the 50% or more in the primary, then they don't have a general election because of the low voter turnout. If we're going to do that, my preference would be that we just eliminate the primary, or we would at least put it up for a vote.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, my opinion on this kind of is, you know what, the Charter Review Committee recommended, that's what they recommended. That's just probably what we should put up for a vote,
Yeah.
the recommendation as is. I mean, because my personal opinion only matters when I go to that ballot box. So, that's all I have, thank you.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Councilmember.
Mayor Pro Tem, may I speak just for a moment?
Oh, Mayor Rowland, absolutely. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I really love this discussion, and I've got kind of two thoughts here on it. One is I'm getting concerned that we're maybe to the tipping point on what changes we can make to the charter. And what I'm saying there is there's a lot of recommendations been made. We've gone from 60 pages down to 30 pages. That's a lot of change. I would be of the basic opinion, and I don't know if this shares Councilmember Stewart's opinion, that we not tinker with or tweak the general or primary election right now, in a sense of leave it the way it is and not change it, and then maybe just do amendments later on for a 51% if we want to do that. I'm just concerned that we're making so many changes to the charter that if somebody wanted to run a campaign against it, they would have quite a bit of fodder to adjust. So that's my thought, my recommendations with regards to stay with the primary, stay with the general. People in independents are used to that. Just like you said, it's difficult for old dogs to learn new tricks. I mean, no disrespect with that. I'm just saying that people are used to that process, and that's my thought on it. I'd rather leave it the way it is, and then the group can certainly decide on the 51%, but I personally would prefer just to keep it the way it is. So that's my thoughts on it, and I'll jump off.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. There's some wisdom in that. It is a lot of change. There needs to be a lot of change because it's been so long since we've changed anything. So it's a fair point to make that we need to make a lot of change. I mean, it's been longer a longer amount of time since we've changed it than it was since it was last changed, since it started. So, you know, it's a legitimate need that we have, and real change is needed. We don't need clairvoyance. I mean, that's fairly ridiculous. So, but it's a fair point. Sometimes you have to stretch these changes out even a little bit longer. We're certainly getting the ball rolling in a very wonderful direction, thanks to our charter committee. So that's definitely something we'll think about and talk about. And I like very much the direction that your associate has come up with. The division of the question seems to make some sense, and I'll definitely take a closer look at that for sure.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes, council member.
So Lindsay, would you recommend that we then organize this charter so that the supporting items are under the different questions, so that the document that the community reads would have section 1, 2, 3, 6, 9 under one question as a supporting document?
Correct, but it would just be on the city's website. But
Okay.
it would be question 1, article 1, 2, 4, 5, and 11, and then that would be its own PDF, so that
Okay.
you can know
Great.
that's what that question is about.
My thought is, I mean, there's going to have to be, you know, some, obviously, information put out regarding this process. So, you know, it's going to have a page on the website. It would have the full document there in red line, right? That you can show, here's all, so you can read, you know, if you wanted to, you could kind of read it. It's going to, at that point, it would just be the final, just going to be one red line, right? Whatever those changes that you all are putting forward. So that would be a complete document, and then it would also be broken down by question. So that way, if someone, you know, for question 1, you know, that's where I was talking about, where the questions are going to have to be, I mean, a little bit descriptive in terms of, you know, what they're addressing, but obviously we can't put it all in there because that would just be, you know, that'd be a lot. So then it would, okay, go click on question 1, and question 1 is going to have a PDF that has all of those articles in it that would be changed under question 1.
So just so I understand, would the question be written, shall the city come into compliance with Missouri state statute, allow for electronic notification, and modernize its approach to the court system? Is that how a question is written, or do you say we are doing section 1397?
It's not going to, I wouldn't recommend listing out the sections because, again, they'll be listed in, you know, on the website in that accompanying document. Ideally, we would have been able to hand people a handout, an exhibit like I had wanted, but that's, you know, they weren't on board with that. So it's not going to list out section by, this is, in my mind, it does not list it out section by section. It's more the way you phrased it in the first point.
Okay.
You know, should the City of Independence Charter be amended to, you know, bring the, you know, it to become in compliance with, you know, with this section, to make changes to regulations of this, that sort of kind of more general language.
Okay.
So that would be the question. It will have some descriptors in it to give an idea, but then in order to actually, you know, see, if you really want to see exactly what it is, the only way to do that is going to be to click, you know, to refer back to the website.
Would you reference that in the question?
I don't think they're going to let us do that.
Okay.
Will they let us have a QR code outside that people could go and link to the website?
I'm not sure about that. The concern that they had was they were afraid that any of this, that essentially was them supporting electioneering.
Yeah.
That's,
Oh.
I mean, you know,
Yeah.
to me, I don't think that's quite what this is, because again, this is from the city standpoint, this is all educational. It's just to assist in the vote. It's not about trying to advocate or sway anyone to vote one way or the other.
Right.
is to provide information. That, you know, they take a more conservative approach, and that's, you know, that's their job. So no, I don't think we'd be able to have any sort of QR code or hand out anything, you know, more, you know, I mean, the answer is no. I don't think they would allow us to do that. I think the best we're going to be able to do is, you know, put this out in a campaign in advance to say, here it is on the website, put it on utility bills, you know, put it on the website, put it on Facebook, make it clear. And like I said, obviously people can look in advance, but I mean, you know, we have phones. You know, you can take your phone in and have it all clicked up, ready to go, and say, okay, question, you know, or already know in advance. Okay, I'm going to vote yes on questions 1, 2, and 3, and I'm going to vote no on question 4. Right? I mean, you don't have to have it right there in front of you to actually answer those if we've given you all that information in advance. So that's my goal.
And if I could remind the council, that's how the recreational marijuana amendment was. It wasn't entirely listed on the ballot. It was pretty simple, and you could look it up outside of.
I was going to
election.
mention that because the actual amendment was gigantic, and the ballot language was not. It was confusing.
I think it was one sentence.
Yes, agreed.
It was still confusing, but it was not listed in full. I saw, I can't remember how many versions ultimately of that language and how many different states had used a version of it, but
Yeah, so the goal would just be the questions themselves. Again, they in my mind now there's a little more detail, you know, with them than there would have been if you just had had a handout, you know, because you can't just say, should we approve the changes in question 1, and then you'd have that. So there's going to be a little more detail in there, but certainly not where it's actually listing out section numbers or giving specific language or anything like that. It's just about kind of what are the main themes of the changes in this article or in this question, and that's what would be listed in the ballot question, and then they'd be able to go to the website to look at the actual changes.
yeah, people, in order to intelligently vote on it, people will definitely have to have prepared themselves for it, for sure. Yeah,
May I make one more request?
absolutely.
In addition to the segmented, question 1 with these supporting items, can we also have a clean version of the charter for people who want to read what it's going to look like when we're done, so that we have both options? Because it's really a different way to read both issues. Thank you.
I'm waiting for you. You look like you're going to say something.
No, it's not a terrible idea. It just needs to maybe be in green or something. I mean, you don't want people to think that, so long as it's clearly delineated, you don't want people to think that that's what the charter is now or something, you know?
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I mean,
Yeah.
we can certainly have it. I mean, it would be a draft version of the charter. So essentially, if all of the changes that you all decide to put forward were approved, this is what
Right.
the charter would look like. Is that what you're saying? I mean, so we make that clear so that there's no confusion in terms of the document. But if you want it to be clean, then then it can't have additional, formatting with it. If it's clean, it looks like a final document.
Yeah.
And we have that. That's not a problem. And we can kind of, when we get ready for the March 11th, we can have a little more detail on what that will look like if this is generally, the direction you all want to go.
Yeah. Mr. Walker, I wanted to ask you about one more topic on here.
Sure.
The proposed changes remove a lot of the city departments from the charter. Have you talked to any of your department heads about this? Have they seen it? Do they know about it? Are any of them worried about it? Is this a thing? What does this mean?
So again, if I could start with that historical context, I'll just remind everybody that when that charter was created in the late 60s, it was, really to try to put as many safeguards in place to protect the, well-managed, professional, ethical, local government function. Through the years, that national model charter that most every city follows, with some variation to suit their unique community's needs. It is extremely uncommon to have your departments listed in your city charter. Your city charter functions more like the United States Constitution, where it lays out the basic parameters of government, that there's this legislative branch, in the case the council, the executive branch, in case here the city manager's office, and the department heads. But it doesn't go into enumerating the specificity of what those departments are. And the reason for that is, over time, new nomenclature comes along, the needs of a community change, so that you may need to adapt the most efficient way, because that's what the preamble of the charter starts with: providing efficient, effective service delivery to the citizens. And so fulfilling that mission may mean adapting how those services look or feel or whatever. You still provide them, it's just how do you organize to best provide them. So it's not a common theme in that it limits and restricts the community's ability to organize itself in the present tense for the best way to do that. So there's no, well, your question was, have we reviewed that with the department heads? Yes. And again, knowing we're going to have all of the services that we have, a modern police department, fire department, take care of the streets, take care of basic drinking water, health, sanitation, all those things. It's a matter of, what does this community look like 50 years from now, and what do we call these services, and who's leading them, and how are they provided?
I think I read in there that there's still language that says the council can create departments too if they deem necessary.
That's correct.
So we can make our own Space Force.
There may come a time.
Astronaut Adam Dustman.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, may I interrupt?
Go ahead, Mayor Rowland.
Thank you. I've got one other question. I know we talked about this, and I don't have the document right in front of me, so please forgive me. If I may ask Mr. Cover for some clarification before I jump into my question.
No, of course, go ahead.
Thank you. Mr. Cover, I know we had talked about the assignment of the municipal judge, and I'm in agreement with my colleagues that it should be a collective decision on behalf of the council. My question is, would we do that every time the municipal judge's term comes up, or could the mayor, whoever that is, reappoint them unless there's an objection? How's the process set up now? I'm just concerned that every time this person comes up, rather than just a simple reappointment, it might be quite a process, and I'm trying not to make everything a process every time that it comes up. So that's my question.
Mayor, let me find that section real quick, because
Please.
I don't recall the specifics on that. Thank you.
Lindsay has it memorized at this point.
That would not surprise
Sorry.
me.
Article 4, page 20.
So the terms of the original appointment shall be 4 years. Thereafter, members shall be elected. That's for the actual charter. That's for the judicial commission.
It's written right there. We have to approve it.
So it looks like, so we've got, the charter currently allows for 4-year terms. So essentially, with each term, we would have to go through, at the most every 4 years, we would have to go through that reappointment process. So it wouldn't, and I guess I don't know if you consider that burdensome or not, but it would require that process to be done at the end of every 4-year term.
So if I may ask for clarification, Mr. Cover, if we do that, if we go with the 4-year term, would it require that we have the Judicial Commission come up with 3 recommendations, and the council would then select that one person? I'm just looking at it as almost a reappointment to a committees that we have now. We basically at a study session say, hey, these are the people that we're going to nominate. If there's no objections, their term will just be reappointed. Something like that. Of course, if you have a whole new, if a judge retires and wins the lottery and we need to pick a new judge, I'm completely in favor of the whole process being triggered. But if we've got somebody who has served their 4 years, has served honorably, and everyone's pleased, there's no objections, then just have the person reappointed. That's kind of my question, but I'm not sure this process allows that to happen. And certainly I'd want to hear from my colleagues to make sure they feel comfortable with that. But that's my thoughts, so it doesn't have to become a complete process every 4 years because it hasn't been in the past. And that's my question, and that's and I'm certainly open for discussion on that.
So I think, so you may be right. I can't speak on what the practice has been. But if the preference from the council is as the mayor outlined, a process where essentially would allow for a more streamlined reappointment. So in other words, the appointment would be as outlined, but a reappointment could be done in a more to an additional term could be a more streamlined fashion. We'll need to take a closer look. But if that is the direction that you all want to go, then we can certainly adjust the language so that's the case.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem?
Go ahead, council member.
So just how this came up, the way the original language is written, there is a panel who makes recommendations of 3 people for the judge. And the way the charter is written now, the mayor alone picks someone from that without any conference with colleagues and no other vote. And I think the municipal judge is such an important role in the city that you would want for at least some buy-in and conversation from the rest of the council for that. I have no objection to the reappointment process continuing apace as it has been. But certainly for that first appointment, I think that's so important that it should require a deliberation of this body.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, can I interject?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Councilmember McCandless, I agree with you completely. I think when we appoint a new municipal judge, it's such a critical role that we should all be very, very involved with the process. I completely and absolutely agree with you. And if I'm hearing you correctly, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but if, hey, the municipal judge is going to be reappointed, if there's no objections, the mayor will have the authority to go ahead and reappoint them. If there is an objection, then we talk about, okay, do we want to go through the process? I would hear it that way, that even if just one member, if they have an objection, could trigger the whole process. What's the wishes of the body? And I'll get off and just listen to anybody's thoughts.
So if you want, we can have that language ready. What I'm hearing, the thought is, just because sometimes it can be hard to kind of visualize it without having it actually in front of you. We can have that ready to go for the March 11th study session, and that way you can actually see what that would look like, and we'll call it out for you so you can see those changes that we made since any changes that we make from tonight, we'll make sure to put in an email to you so you don't have to go through the whole document. And at this point, it's gonna be pretty nominal. But any changes we make from the current version to the next time, it's not going to be in a different color. I think that's going to get a bit much. But we will call out those changes so that you can just go look straight at those. So we can have that language. I think what I'm hearing the mayor, the idea, have that ready to go for next time, and you all can take a look at it if that works.
We've been really lucky to have good municipal judges here for quite some time. There have been occasions locally when that has not been so good, not in Independence, but in other towns around here. And I like the idea that our judges might know there could be some accountability. I like that. So I'd like to see that language.
I think that'd be good.
Yep, we'll do it.
Have we given you enough direction to craft the five, or maybe four, whichever we decided here, ballot languages for us to look at?
I think so. One area I do still want to clarify is on the utility question itself. So before there had all along it's been talked about having that as a separate question, but there had also been discussions about not having that question right now with this group. So is there any more guidance on that issue?
I don't think it needs to be
I think it doesn't need to be a separate question. I think we keep that language, but just include it. I think we make the language change, but leave it in, not as a separate question, because I think people will appreciate it and vote for it. I don't think it needs to be a separate question. That's my take on it.
My only concern with that is that it is buried in with a bunch of other stuff, and people may not notice it there. If it's its own question, it calls out that says, citizens shall vote for, and then it's a yes or a no. Now, there are going to be some people who think they're voting to sell or not sell because they won't read it, but I think with the crispness of that particular statement, I think that's important.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem,
Yes, sir.
I agree with Councilmember McAllis. I think it needs to be its own question. Just because
Well,
how big of a deal
let's
it is.
prepare it as its own question then for March 11th.
Yeah, the March 11th is a study session.
Yeah.
The idea is to come back at that study session to have a draft ordinance for you all, so that again, and give any more feedback you want, so that we could then take that and have it ready to go for it'd be the first meeting in April. It would be the first reading of the actual ordinance. So yeah, this is still coming back to another study session.
I am, okay, so let's do that.
Okay.
And on the primary, is anybody passionate about having a vote on the primary? Are we generally okay with just leaving it the way it is?
I'm comfortable leaving it the way it is.
For now.
Yeah, and since we are mandating, should that part pass, a 7-year review, we have the opportunity to revisit that question again in 7 years. And then that would be a much smaller vote of the people than the large amount we have to change this time.
Yes, you are correct. I do want to, so the 7 years is a minimum. So
could
the
be
way as proposed, that it says that it shall happen every 7 years. If you all wanted to
Of course.
have a charter review commission every year, you could certainly do that. So yes, none of this.
Oh, did you hear that, Miss Summer? Mr. McDonald, you guys ready? What are you doing in August?
Yeah, I mean, so seven years was, again, that came from the Charter Commission. There was a lot of discussion about where that number came from. But that's a minimum to basically to keep us from being in this situation again where we're having to make so many changes. Ideally, going forward, once we get past this, that
Yeah.
anytime, the changes will be much more nominal, much less substantive, really just sort of keeping up with the times and not these huge overhauls. This is really, theoretically, this is sort of a one-time occurrence with this many changes, and it'll just be kind of little tweaks going forward.
Yeah,
I had one other thought.
absolutely.
I know there are people who are like, why would you take the departments out of the charter? But I mean, just this year, we have taken the water department and put it in municipal services. If it was forever in there as the water department, it could never be changed, no matter how much sense it made for shared services or cooperative services. I mean, part of the reason that you combine that is so when you dig up the road to replace the water main, the guys who work on the streets are part of that same department and can do coordinated services. So, I mean, I understand there are people that change of any kind is really unsettling, but there are basic functions of the city that we're going to have, no matter if I call it the police department or the security department or the justice department or some other name.
Space Force.
I think we're going to hold off on the Space Force. But, basic functions are going to need to happen, whether or not it's crystallized in its old form inside the charter. Anyway, thank you very much.
Yes, council member. Any other comments?
Just that, I can live with not including the primary question in at this time. I think my rationale on that is twofold. One is because, as was mentioned, that we can look at it again the next charter review. But number two is that with the number of changes that we have here, that's probably likely to be the most controversial question. And so it makes the process for people to look through and evaluate these questions maybe easier for them to vote yes for if they don't have something that they feel like is very controversial. That would be my hope anyway, so.
Yeah.
I can live with that.
I would like to see it go away eventually, but I think for now so don't worry about writing that question. I think we're okay with that for now. I would like to see it go away, but personally, but I'm fine if it doesn't for now. So,
Yeah, so based on what we're hearing,
Yeah.
we'd have 4 questions
yes,
ready to go for March 11th. That would, that will be in the ordinance. Obviously, the draft ordinance is going to, would be approving the actual ballot language.
yes,
So we'll have that ready to go for March 11th, so you all can give us feedback on that.
yes. We sure appreciate your hard work, Mr. Cover and Lindsay. That's really great work, and Mr. Walker. We know you put in a lot of hard time. Again, to the chair, the members of the Charter Committee, you did God's work and gave up a chunk of your life for this, and the City of Independence can't thank you enough. So much and so good work. Mr. Mayor, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
No, I just want to say I echo your thoughts. I want to actually thank Councilmember McCandless, Councilmember Fears for their work of going through it line by line, word by word. They helped us so much in giving us direction. I just wanted to say thank you to both of them for all the hard work they did. Again, I want to say thank you to the Charter Commission. They did an extraordinary job. And thank you to the staff for the great job that they did. I agree with you completely. They've just done an extraordinary job, and my confidence level in this product is so much higher than when we started this journey of going, oh my God, will we get there? And I feel extremely confident in the product they've produced, and I just really, really like what they've done. So I just cannot say enough good things about everybody that's worked on this. And I just want to say thank you all very much. And Mayor Pro Tem, thank you for reaching out to me and giving me a moment there to chat. So thank you.
Travel safe, Mr. Mayor. And anybody have anything else on this item? All right, with that, we're adjourned. Or, excuse me, Mr. City Manager, anything else on this item?
No, don't believe so, sir. Just verifying, but nope, I think we're good.
Okay, very good. Then this meeting's adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.